What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our fades and sleepers for this week's John Deere Classic. We've got a shitty field, but a ton of chalk towards the top, the middle end of the board, which is really giving us a lot of value, a lot of opportunity from the game theory side of things. So here in this video, going to react to some of those ownership numbers and bring you 3 overhyped and 3 underhyped plays going into lock that you might want to consider for your lineups. And obviously with the overhyped players, you might want to consider avoiding them, right? Not taking them in a lot of your builds. At the very least, try and vet them, make sure if you're taking them that they really are a play that you want to back. And then on the flip side, right, some of the underhyped players that maybe aren't getting the steam that they deserve here. So without further ado, a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and start it off with our fades. Our first fade this week is probably the most dangerous. It is Russell Henley at a solid $10,400, and my worry is his putting at a birdie fest. He's been a lot better of late, that's why people are getting there in bunches, but still only gaining 0.2 strokes per round. If he were to go out there, replicate that over 4 days, right, gain something close to like maybe a stroke over the 4 rounds, I don't think that's enough to get you the type of performance you need at $10,400. It's one thing when Russell Henley is a top of the 7K, perhaps an 8K option in a weaker field event, but when he's $10,400, when he's tied for the highest ownership of any player on the entire slate, you're asking for a different type of outcome, right? A top 10 finish, a top 20 finish is not going to get it done for you. So that's the worry there. I just worry about the upside. If you're playing in cash, single entries, smaller field kind of DFS contests, I don't think I hate him nearly as much, but he is drawing a lot of ownership. So you can see I've got him at 22.9% right now. So despite being, in terms of my total model ranking, the number 5 player in the field, I just don't think it's worth the juice, right? Worth the price or worth going out there and taking him in half of your DFS lineups. Our next fade, we're going to go through these pretty quickly, right? We've got 6 plays to go through. It's the day of lock, so I got to get things done. Emiliano Grillo, $9,200. He's another player that struggles with the flat stick. Of late, has been putting a lot better, so kind of similar to Henley, actually putting even better than a Henley, I'd say, gaining over half a stroke per round there. You take a look at the last 36 rounds, so even if we zoom out a little bit, you can see he's still gaining with the flat stick. So I would say this one's more of a risky fade, but it's the same thing, right? Even when he's playing his best golf of late, right? He's been an absolute heater, includes a win, includes another top 15 finish a few starts ago. He's still only gaining like 2, maybe 2.5 strokes putting per event. When he spikes for a win, right, it's like 3, 4 strokes putting in an event. I don't know if that's enough at this kind of golf course. It is a putting first type of place. You're going to see a ton of 20 to 25 footers made, and I fear that if he's not making 1 to 2 of those per round, that he might start to get a little bit behind the 8 ball, and just like a Henley, a little bit less so, right? He's also $9,200. We can't just get away with a top 20 finish, right? Grillo, we need to go out there, probably finish in the top 10, maybe even in the top 5 at that kind of price tag to end up paying off in this field, and I don't want to say it's impossible. He could go out there and win this golf tournament for all we know, right? He has that kind of upside. I just think there are other guys around him, and one that we'll talk about a little bit later, right? That's $100 cheaper that I think you could take and scattershot around him that have the same, if not a better chance to succeed for one reason or the other. So nothing too much against you, Grillo. I just don't love the flat stick. Definitely don't love the ownership there. And our last fade is going to be Ghim, another guy that struggles with the flat stick. So it's not like I'm only taking good putters this week, but if I'm going to take a piece of chalk, somebody that I'm investing 35 to sometimes even half of my lineups into, they do have to be a good putter. And it's not nearly as chalky here, but I do have Ghim at 13% owned, which means you got to take him in at least a quarter of your lineups, if not closer to like 30% plus to get the leverage you're looking for, which is something that I'm just personally not willing to do. You take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, you can see he's been really good tee to green, about a neutral with the flat stick, and then over the last 36 measured rounds, a very similar story. In fact, just a slight negative with the flat stick over the last 36. So definitely been a lot better with the putter than what we're used to seeing. It's kind of a trend across all 3 of these players, but I don't know how long it's going to hold up. Long term, all 3 are among some of the worst putters on the PGA Tour, and I'm expecting that to rear its ugly head at some point. So that's the idea there. If they were moderately owned, if they were even just averagely owned for their range, I would probably be a lot more willing to play a Grillo, a lot more willing to play a Ghim, or get up there to a Russell Henley, but they're all 3 among the most popular options on the entire slate. which is going to have me getting to these sleeper plays. So luckily in these three cases, they're all pretty much pivots just off of the fades that we talked about. So we'll be able to use them as a good comparison to why I prefer these players as opposed to their chalkier counterparts. So in terms of our sleepers, Ludwig Auberg, $10,100. He is, you can see right here, less than half the ownership, right? Actually just ran around 10% as opposed to 23% with a Russell Henley, and a player that has actually gained with the flat stick. We don't have a ton of measured rounds for Auberg, right? But has been prolific off the tee, has been ridiculous, both with his distance and his accuracy, but has been a pretty decent putter and a really good around the green player. He's had spike rounds where he's gone out there, gained like half a stroke per round, and one or two bad rounds that have him as a slight negative overall. He seems like the type of player that's more off the tee and putting heavy than anything. Decent short game. He has a few chip-ins, which I think are the reason why he's actually gaining 0.6 strokes per round, but honestly, in terms of long-term pedigree, Auberg, much better player than Russell Henley. But even considering the form that these two players are in, I think I'd have him as a toss-up, right? Like Henley playing super well, putting it pretty well right now, but Auberg, right, on his own right, a couple top 25s. I know last week wasn't his best finish, but it's his worst finish on tour, and it was a top 40 finish, with him shooting over par on the weekend at the Rocket Mortgage. I mean, after 2 days, we were crowning this guy as the champion last week. People were like, okay, Auberg's one of the best players on tour already, right? And then he fell apart over the weekend. Are we really going to let that completely cloud our judgment, right? 2 rounds, and now say that like, oh, this kid's not worth the price of admission anymore here. It should be 2 sometimes, and especially in single entries. I think Auberg will be 3, sometimes even 4 times lower owned than what you see with a Henley and then a Denny McCarthy up top. I think that is ludicrous. So in large field GPPs, if you're playing the game theory game, you're trying to go out there and take advantage of some of the leverage to be had here, Auberg is the clear play to me, right? Especially because like in this week of a field at Birdie Fest, there's a lot of variance to begin with. And then when you factor in that Auberg's probably just a lot better than Henley is long-term, I'm going to try and invest on that side. Next up, we've got ourselves Sheamus Power. So he's the pivot off of Emiliano Grillo. And for Sheamus Power, a lot of it's event history. He's been really good here, which unless you're looking at the event history, you're probably not going to remember because there's no like top 5s, no wins on the record, right? But look at this. T8 made the cut, T61, T16, T25. And those T16, T25, even this made cut were when Sheamus Power was in the dumps. The guy had never really done anything on the tour to that point. He was making cuts and has a few top 10 finishes. So I like what I'm seeing from Power. I like the form. And the last 36 measured rounds, you got to think are horrible for Power, right? Like, we haven't seen this guy anywhere. He's about a neutral with everything, gaining with the putter. The last 12 rounds ago, okay, well, he must have been horrible of late. Well, I mean, kinda, right? The approach play hasn't been good, but he's still gaining to the field, right, over the last 12 measured rounds. It's not nearly as poor of a performance as I think a lot of people out there would think. So good old Sheamus will be in my pool. It's, a long-term pedigree kind of play compared to somebody like a Grillo. And in terms of strengths, right, Power, really good at Birdie Fest, has all of his wins, all of his top 5s at really, low strength of field sort of events, because that's where, he broke out onto the tour, right? We're in these like alternate fields, like in these smaller field events where he'd go out there and finish top 25. Now he's had a few top 10s in majors since then, right? He's a much better player at his stage of his career. But we're kind of getting him priced like he used to be priced at the beginning of his career, right? Because the form isn't outrageous, right? Because he's only gaining 0.2 strokes per round over his last 12. We get a nice ownership and a really nice salary discount there that I'll definitely be taking advantage of. So like cement putter, and yeah, Grillo, like if we had to do the same comparison as the top, like Grillo's in really good form, right? But like long-term, Power's the better player, right? So you've got, recent form versus long-term form. Like what are you looking at there? It's a kind of a toss-up to me, right, between the two, except when we look at the ownership and Power's half the ownership. It makes our decision for us there. Our last little sleeper, last pivot that we were talking about is going to be Patrick Rodgers, who is typically pretty chalky, right? I mean, he's normally, I'd say, a PGA DFS fan's favorite, right? He makes a lot of birdies. People love playing this guy for whatever reason. And he's not half the ownership of a Doug Ghim, but he's only 8.1% owned, which, considering his course history, which is also surprisingly good, you'll see T30, T23, T43 in a second place finish back there. I believe that was hole back in 2017. Yeah, a long time ago. You had Patrick Rodgers finishing in second place. Surprising to say the least, right? Especially when P. Rodgers was a complete nobody back there in 2017. The form's been there too, kind of similar. He's been hitting the ball pretty well. Maybe not over the last 12 measured rounds, but the around the green putter's always been there. Last 36, a little bit more favorable for somebody like Patrick Rogers. You can see gaining in both those categories, right? Still doing his thing with the short game. P. Rogers is always going to be a really good short game player. But this off the tee and approach play is why he started to get real chalky, right? Why he became that fan favorite that people were getting to, because he has always had the upside. He's always been able to go out there, make a bunch of birdies, post a pop performance every once in a while. But what's separated himself, what's changed, is he's more consistent now. And the ball striking has started to elude him, right? That's why the ownership's not there. That's why he's only $8,300 in this field. And it's also why no one's getting to him. That's why he's only 8.1% owned. But kind of like we have with the Sheamus Power here, if you're willing to look at the bigger sample, you're willing to take a step back and go, hey, golf's a hard sport. Sometimes you get into down ruts, right? Especially when you're playing well and you get into some of those elite tier fields, it becomes even harder, right, to get those top end finishes. I think we got to give guys like a Power and a Patrick Rogers a little bit of a break, right? They've been playing in some tough fields. They've been playing against the world's best. Now they get a cupcake field at a super straightforward golf course on a surface that they all like, right? Bent grass, positive for these three players, compared to their counterparts that are negative putters. I just think that's where the value is. That's where the game theory edge is going to be here, and why I'm getting to those lower owned options as a change. That's all I've got for the fades and sleepers this week. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me. And also, let me know who you're fading in your number one sleeper pick of the week. Just try and make them a little bit chalky for the fades. Your sleeper play, let's go 10% or lower in terms of ownership. And I think that's being pretty lenient there in terms of a sleeper. And would love to hear your thoughts down there, right? There's a lot of ownership decisions to be made. There's a lot of really good plays that you have to end up fading. So I always love to hear the thought process, right? Sometimes it's tough to make those fades, and the toughest of fades are usually the ones when they pan out that end up paying off the most. So let me know down below any hot takes that you've got. We'll be doing our live stream tonight at 7 p.m. as per usual. We'll be going over the weather there. It does look like there's going to be a lot of storms in the area here today, so that can make the golf course soft. We'll talk about the implications of that. We'll go through the chalk. All of your questions. We'll go through some lineup construction stuff, props towards the end of the stream, everything you need to know to get your week started on the right front. I'm looking forward to it. Again, I appreciate all the support here on the channel, and I'll see you guys later on for the stream.